Hey Retrospectors, did you know we are a completely independent show and we rely on your donations to keep going?
And did you know that our Club Retrospectors supporters on Patreon get an ad-free podcast feed, an exclusive Sunday episode, and weekly bonus bits?
If you didn't know, well, now you do. And here's one more fun fact. For our 3rd birthday and for a limited time only, we are discounting annual memberships by 16%.
And it's risk-free. There's a 7-day free trial. Just head to patreon.com/retrospectors.
That's patreon.com/retrospectors.
And now, on with the show.
It's May 28, 1934, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Ariel, Rebecca, and Ollie, the Retrospectors.
A remote farmhouse in rural French-speaking Ontario hardly seems like the most likely place for a worldwide sensation to begin. Yet it was here, today in history in 1934, that Yvonne, Annette, Cécile, Émilie and Marie Dionne were born. The first surviving quintuplets in recorded history. The world had literally never seen anything like them.
Dr Allan Roy Dafoe, who was the doctor who delivered them, began spreading the news about what had just happened straight away. First, he ran into the girl's uncle's home and told him that his brother and sister-in-law had just gone from being parents of 5 to being parents of 10 in one fell swoop. And then he ran to the post office and told everyone inside, and then he went to a store clerk who he said should tell the local newspaper, but actually the girl's uncle had already gone ahead and done that. And so the editor of the North Bay Nugget had already dispatched a photographer to the farmhouse, and within 6 hours of these girls' birth, the Dionne Quintuplets were being photographed for papers ready for the world to see.
Which was news. They were the first quintuplets to survive ever in recorded history. There is a 1 in a billion chance of that happening. And it happened in this really obscure part of rural Canada. So that is a story, but I'm a bit uncomfortable that it was the physician who recognised that, when you sort of think, really, he should be looking after their mother? I mean, she thought she was pregnant with her 7th child, not her 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th and 11th. And these are people living in a humble log cabin, no plumbing, no electricity, they didn't speak English. And suddenly they're thrust into the media spotlight whilst coming to terms with having 5 new children.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that they had the other children that turns this story from, like quirky mid-century novelty to absolute body horror. They had been married for 9 years at this point, Oliva and Elsie, the parents. They had 5 children, the youngest of whom was 11 months old on this day. They also went on to have, and I don't feel like I need to say that they were devoutly Catholic, 3 more children after this.
Yeah.
I mean,
wow.
Yeah, I know. The thing,
withdrawal method, 2 words, come on.
and the thing about Dafoe as well is that he would go on to be kind of a celebrity in his own right as the doctor who had ushered these quintuplets into the world. But they certainly did not survive because of cutting-edge medical care. A train was organised to deliver donated breast milk to the family home every day because they needed more than Elsie could supply. And so these women were paid, it was a Great Depression, these women were paid to donate their own breast milk, and then this special train would bring it to the house.
And then they were given this thing that was called 27 formula, which consisted of cow's milk, boiled water, 2 spoonfuls of corn syrup, and then 2 drops of rum for, inverted commas, stimulation. It's sort of astonishing that, giving rum to underweight babies was, the procedure at the time.
But with that came offers for media exposure almost immediately. And I suppose now, it would be awful that you'd have to get yourself a celebrity agent on day 5 of being a new parent. But I suppose that's what would happen now, isn't it? You'd get someone to be your representative, all the offers would go through them, and then you'd say, OK, yes, we can have $1 million if we advertise this baby milk, let's do it. But then, stake in this. But with that came offers for media exposure almost immediately. And I suppose now, it would be awful that you'd have to get yourself a celebrity agent on day 5 of being a new parent. But I suppose that's what would happen now, isn't it? You'd get someone to be your representative, all the offers would go through them, and then you'd say, OK, yes, we can have $1 million if we advertise this baby milk, let's do it. But then the letters were going directly to the mum and dad. They didn't know what to do. They felt they were being exploited. And the province of Ontario came up with a way to protect them, in inverted commas.
Yeah, well, part of the reason why the state had offered to step in was because the girl's father was really worried about how much he could accept in this largesse that was being offered to him and, to what extent he should be accepting the offers of financial recompense in exchange for kind of showing his daughters around the place. He apparently approached a priest to get guidance, like moral and spiritual guidance on that question. And the priest himself offered to be his business manager, which is a bit nuts. But soon a deal was signed to show them at the Chicago World's Fair for tens of thousands of dollars, which would have been a fortune in those days.
Yeah, and so what ended up happening was that the Dionnes ended up signing over custody of the 5 girls to the Red Cross for 2 years in exchange for all the medical care would be supplied. And in September 1934, the girls were moved into the Dafoe Hospital and Nursery. He wasn't shy about getting his name on it, was he? It had been specially built near the family's home to accommodate them, and they would live there until they were 9 in this sort of odd compound that was part hospital, part nursery, part school. They were all tutored there, and it was also kind of part lab. They were constantly studied and examined, and you can see, it makes perfect sense that they were, because they were the only known surviving quintuplets. Of course, doctors and scientists wanted to study them, but it gives it this sort of zoo-like quality, which wasn't helped by the fact that their play area was covered with a one-way screen so that visitors could watch them. I mean, the screen was there for their privacy, so they couldn't see that they were being watched. But the girl said, of course, they could hear they were being watched. It wasn't a soundproof screen. 3 million people viewed them, including people like Betty Davis and Clark Gable, travelled all the way to this remote area of Ontario to stare at these 5 girls through a one-way screen.
And came from far and wide to stay in the town as well, this not being a tourist destination before this. So you suddenly had this new industry built around the quintuplets. The location of the hospital came to be known as Quintland.
It's crazy. By 1937, Quintland was more popular a tourist destination than Niagara Falls.
And it was so popular on one Labour Day that 10,000 tourists turned up on the one day, which meant if there isn't hotels, if there isn't infrastructure, you've got people in other people's houses and sitting rooms. So everyone in the town was making a buck out of these 5 kids.
Yeah, their dad ran a souvenir shop opposite the hospital, but they hardly ever saw their parents and other siblings.
And kept away from the realities of life as well as part of that promotional effort. So Annette, Yvonne and Cécile, who were the 3 surviving quintuplets by the 90s, gave an interview to the BBC then. And they were talking about some footage that was shown as part of this documentary they were interviewed in, which showed them apparently on their 5th birthday, having cake, there was a puppy, whatever. And they said, yeah, we remember that. That was a photo shoot. That was an empty fake cake with empty gift boxes all around. We never had a real birthday. We never had real birthday presents.
Yeah, and while everyone else around them was making bank, the 5 siblings, they did technically have trust funds. Those had been set up, but in practice they were drained by their guardians, by the state, by their own parents as well. When they eventually moved back into the family home, not the the rundown hovel they'd been born into, but this sprawling 20-room house their parents had built, they had built that out of the trust fund. And obviously, at the time it was just seen as, well, we're building a house for the girls to live in, so we can just take that out of the trust fund. But in practice it meant that they obviously, it's very predictable, they barely received anything from all of this money that had been generated from their names and images.
Yeah, and the reunion was a particularly unhappy one in so many ways. First of all, the girls felt really guilty for just what they'd done to the family in terms of the media attention that they'd brought on them and the forced separation that occurred. And their mother treated them really harshly, often sort of screaming insults and even hitting them. And decades later, 3 of them also claimed that their father had sexually abused them.
And there was also just this huge social divide between them and their brothers and sisters. Like, they'd never known their siblings, and then suddenly they come in as the celebrity siblings, and they're supposed to be getting on with these other 5 kids that are older than them. That's difficult anyway, who hate them, basically. And there's a division between the sort of the classic unit of the family and them. They felt closer to Dr. Dafoe than they did to their own parents. But their actual father, Olivier, had mounted a campaign against Dr. Dafoe, basically for taking money away from the family, publicly. And their only friends are kind of like local kids that have almost auditioned, really, to be their normal friends. 5 or 6 girls that would come to the house each day and pretend they were at a normal school with them.
Yeah, and I mean, the impact of this childhood is really visible in what happened next. All 5 of the girls left home at 18, and none of them had much contact with their parents thereafter, and little contact with their siblings as well. I mean, Emily died relatively young. She became a nun, and she died of an epileptic fit whilst in the convent. And of the others, 3 of the 4 of them married and had kids. Yvonne remained single, but they all lived very, very privately. They all made a very conscious effort to move away from all of that overexposure that they had been subjected to in their childhoods.
Which was aided by the fact that people gradually began to lose interest in them. Through their teen years, they continued to be forced to dress up in matching outfits for photo
mortifying.
shoots. Yeah,
It's bad enough when they didn't know they were being observed and they couldn't see the people. But when they're not like natural showbiz performers, there's some footage of them having to sing when they're like 14 and still dressed in these like black ringlets and blue eyes, dressed identically, and you're just like, oh,
yeah, it is. Yeah,
you can feel the therapy coming through the screen.
Yeah, it's sort of no wonder that 2 of them actually went into the convent. You know, it's like the exact opposite of having the media spotlight on you.
Despite retreating from public view, though, they did, as I say, do this interview in the 90s. The surviving ones do still talk to the Canadian press occasionally. They have at least managed to get out their side of the story.
Yeah, it's funny to look back on this as a period piece and think, well, you know, we've learnt our lessons. But I saw a bit of commentary saying even though the notion of a child zoo today would be impossible, we also have, like, we're witnessing the phenomenon of Instagram kidfluencers. You know, that sort of very much like people being brought up in the public eye by their parents, being sold off for profit. And that's just, you know, another version of this. Writ large,
Quinfluencers.
Yeah.
It would happen,
It's got to
wouldn't it?
happen.
Now,
This episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/Retrospectors.